You know, sometimes family can be the most beautiful thing in the world. A source of unwavering support, unconditional love, a safe harbor. And sometimes it can be a viper's nest, filled with jealousy, resentment, and a cruelty that cuts deeper than any stranger ever could. I'm talking about the kind of betrayal that makes your stomach churn, the kind of snobbery that makes your blood boil. My own sister, the person who shared my childhood, the one I thought I knew, looked me in the eye, smirked, and declared, "No room for your country kids." It was a moment that solidified a decade of simmering resentment and forced me to make a choice. Was I wrong for the revenge I took with just one phone call? Tell me, honestly, if you would have done the same thing, because even now, the memory of her face, twisting with disdain, still burns. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the smirk, before the phone call, before the family fractured beyond repair. My name is Alex, and I grew up in a small, tight-knit family. It was just my parents, my older sister Clara, and me. Clara was always the golden child, the effortlessly beautiful one, the academically brilliant one. She excelled at everything she touched, earning top grades, winning scholarships, and generally sailing through life with an air of effortless superiority. I, on the other hand, was more grounded, more practical. I worked hard, but I never quite measured up to Clara's dazzling achievements in our parents' eyes. They loved us both, of course, but Clara's successes were always celebrated with a little more fanfare, a little more pride. This fostered a subtle, almost imperceptible rivalry between us, especially as we entered our teenage years. Clara would often make passive-aggressive comments about my choices, my clothes, my friends, always with that slight edge of condescension. It was never outright malicious, but it chipped away at my self-esteem. After high school, Clara went off to an elite university in a big city, eventually landing a high-flying corporate job that paid an astronomical salary. She married well, too, to a man named David, who came from old money and worked in finance. They lived in a sprawling, meticulously decorated penthouse apartment in the city's most exclusive district. Their life was a constant parade of luxury cars, designer clothes, extravagant vacations, and exclusive social events. They were the epitome of urban sophistication, and they made sure everyone knew it. I chose a different path. I always loved the outdoors, the quiet beauty of nature, and the satisfaction of working with my hands. I went to an agricultural college, met my wonderful husband Ben there, and together we bought a small farm a few hours outside the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We worked hard, raising organic produce and a small herd of livestock. Our life was simple, honest, and incredibly fulfilling. We had two beautiful children, a boy named Leo and a girl named Mia, who loved running barefoot through the fields and helping us with the animals. They were true country kids, full of life, curiosity, and a healthy appreciation for dirt. Our lives diverged dramatically, and so did our values. Clara and David would occasionally visit, but their visits were always laced with subtle judgment. They'd eye our rustic farmhouse with thinly veiled disdain, make comments about the smell of the country, and express thinly veiled pity for our simple lives. Clara would often say things like, "Oh, Alex, darling, you really should visit the city more often, get some culture." Or, "It's so sweet that you're so grounded. Not everyone can handle the fast pace of urban life, I suppose." It always felt like a backhanded compliment, a reminder of her perceived superiority. I always tried to brush it off, to ignore the barbs. After all, she was my sister. Family was family. But the comments, the disdain, they piled up, creating a thick wall of resentment between us. My kids, bless their innocent hearts, were often the target of Clara's subtle digs. "Oh, look at Leo, covered in mud. Doesn't he have any proper shoes?" Or, "Mia, darling, your hair is so wild. Don't you ever brush it?" My children, who were perfectly happy and well-adjusted, would sometimes pick up on her tone, and I could see the confusion and hurt in their eyes. I'd always step in, defending them, but it never seemed to sink in with Clara. She truly believed her way of life was superior, and that anyone who didn't conform to her urban, affluent ideals was simply less. Our parents, caught in the middle, tried to bridge the gap, but they too were often swayed by Clara's glamour and success. They'd lament that I didn't visit them in the city often enough, ignoring the fact that driving 4 hours with 2 young children and farm responsibilities wasn't always easy. They loved their grandchildren, but they also adored Clara's luxurious lifestyle, and I often felt like my family was seen as a charming, but ultimately less impressive, footnote in the family saga. Over the years, our interactions became less frequent and more strained. We'd see each other at major family events, holidays, birthdays, but even then, Clara's subtle digs and holier-than-thou attitude would spoil the atmosphere. Ben, my husband, always encouraged me to stand up for myself, but I always hesitated, wanting to avoid a full-blown family feud. I held on to the hope that one day Clara would mature, that she would see the value in our different choices, that she would finally act like a loving sister. That hope, however, was about to be irrevocably shattered. The incident that finally broke the camel's back happened around Christmas. My parents had decided to host a large family gathering, inviting all their siblings and cousins and, of course, both Clara's family and mine. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a rare chance for everyone to be together. The plan was for everyone to stay at my parents' house, which was quite large, or with other relatives nearby. Clara, however, declared that her penthouse was far too small to accommodate us, despite its multiple guest rooms. My parents, trying to be accommodating, suggested that perhaps my family could stay at Clara's apartment, just for a night or two. They knew that driving back and forth from the farm for 2 days of Christmas festivities would be exhausting for us, especially with the kids. I was hesitant. I knew Clara's apartment was immaculate, almost like a museum, and my kids, as much as I loved them, were boisterous and prone to leaving a trail of crumbs and toys. But my parents insisted, saying it would be a nice gesture, a chance for the cousins to bond. I called Clara to confirm. I genuinely tried to be as accommodating as possible, suggesting we could bring our own bedding, clean up thoroughly, and keep the kids on their best behavior. I even offered to pay for a professional cleaner after we left. This is where the story truly begins to turn. I remember the phone call so clearly. I was in the kitchen, wiping down counters, with the cheerful sounds of Leo and Mia playing outside. I braced myself for Clara's usual patronizing tone, but nothing could have prepared me for the blatant cruelty that followed. "So, about Christmas," I began, trying to sound cheerful. "Mom and Dad suggested we might stay with you for a night or two. We'd be happy to bring sleeping bags for the kids, and I promise we'll be super tidy." There was a beat of silence on the other end, and then Clara's laugh, a sharp, dismissive sound that always grated on my nerves. "Alex, darling," she purred, and I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. "That's simply not possible." My heart sank. "Oh, is David's family staying then? I understand it is a busy time of year." "Oh no, nothing like that," she said, still with that infuriatingly smug tone. "It's just, there's no room for your country kids especially." My hand tightened around the phone. "What do you mean, country kids?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Well," she continued, completely oblivious, or perhaps deliberately so, "you know how they are, always running around making noise, tracking in dirt. My apartment is pristine, Alex. David and I work very hard to maintain a certain aesthetic. We simply can't have them destroying it. It's not suitable for their kind of energy." Her kind of energy, their kind of energy. The words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just about my kids being messy, it was about them being country, being less than. It was about her open disdain for our entire way of life, for my family, for me. The years of subtle digs, the condescension, the feeling of being judged, it all coalesced into a blinding rage. "Are you seriously telling me," I said, my voice trembling now, "that you're refusing to let your niece and nephew, your own family, stay with you for one night because they're country kids?" "It's just not a good fit, Alex," she replied, her voice cool and utterly devoid of empathy. "Perhaps you should just stay at a motel, or better yet, drive back to your farm. It's not that far, is it?" That was it. The absolute final straw. The blatant disregard, the open contempt, the assumption that I would just quietly accept this insult, all for the sake of her pristine aesthetic. I didn't say another word. I simply hung up the phone, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped it. Ben found me a few minutes later, still standing by the counter, tears streaming down my face. I told him everything, and his own anger mirrored mine. "That's it," he said, his jaw tight. "She's crossed a line. You deserve better, Alex." We all do. The next few days were a blur of simmering anger and a desperate need for a solution. I couldn't let Clara get away with this, not this time. My kids were wonderful, bright, and loving, and they didn't deserve to be treated like second-class citizens by their own aunt. It wasn't just about the Christmas stay anymore. It was about every slight, every condescending remark, every moment she had made me feel small. It was about standing up for my family and our chosen way of life. I knew I couldn't yell or scream at her. That would just be met with her usual self-righteous indifference. I needed something precise, something that would hit her where it hurt the most. Clara prided herself on her image, her connections, her perceived social standing. She craved approval, especially from those she considered her peers in the city's elite circles. She loved to flaunt her wealth and her perfect life. Her career was everything to her. Her meticulously cultivated image was her armor, her weapon, and her greatest vulnerability. This is the situation I was in. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had openly mocked and rejected my children, my family, because we didn't fit into her polished, expensive world. And I was left with a burning desire for justice, for a way to show her that her actions had consequences, without stooping to her level of petty insults. Before I tell you what happened next, what I did with just one phone call, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have confronted her directly? Would you have let it go? Or would you have found a way to deliver a dose of karma that she couldn't ignore? The rage simmered, but it also crystallized into a cold, determined resolve. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her make my kids feel like they were somehow inferior. My revenge wouldn't be loud or dramatic, but it would be effective. It would target her Achilles heel, her carefully constructed public image, and her professional reputation. I thought back to everything I knew about Clara's career. She worked for a very prestigious, high-profile firm, one that prided itself on its ethical standards, its commitment to diversity, and its public relations. She was constantly boasting about her connections, her network, and how important her firm's reputation was. I remembered a conversation years ago where she had bragged about a new initiative her company had launched, a program specifically designed to support rural communities and agricultural businesses. It was a feel-good PR move, designed to show their corporate social responsibility. She had even joked about how ironic it was, given my backwards lifestyle. A light bulb went off in my head. I spent the next few days doing my research. I scoured the internet looking for information about Clara's firm, their CSR, corporate social responsibility initiatives, and particularly this rural outreach program. I found their official statements, their press releases, their glossy brochures touting their commitment to helping underserved communities and bridging the urban-rural divide. It was all very public, very high-minded, and very hypocritical, given Clara's personal attitude. I also recalled another detail from one of her many boastful conversations. Clara had recently been promoted, and part of her new role involved being a public face for some of these CSR initiatives. She was even slated to give a speech at an upcoming industry conference, specifically on the topic of corporate engagement with rural communities. This was my moment. This was the opening I needed. I didn't want to jeopardize her entire career, not entirely. But I wanted to expose her hypocrisy, to make her face the consequences of her snobbery, and to make her understand that her actions, even in private, could have professional repercussions. I drafted a letter carefully and meticulously. It wasn't an angry, emotional rant. It was a calm, factual, and extremely polite letter. I addressed it to the head of her firm's corporate social responsibility department, and I copied the CEO, the head of HR, and a few other key executives whose names I found online. In the letter, I introduced myself as Clara's sister, someone who had dedicated her life to rural agriculture, the very type of community her firm claimed to champion. I described my farm, my family, and the challenges and rewards of our lifestyle. Then, I recounted, in meticulous detail, the phone conversation with Clara regarding the Christmas stay. I quoted her exact words, "No room for your country kids," and her explanation that my children's kind of energy was not suitable for her pristine urban apartment. I highlighted the stark contrast between her personal sentiments and the public image her firm was so carefully cultivating. I subtly but clearly pointed out the irony of an executive involved in rural outreach expressing such blatant disdain for a rural family, her own family, no less. I concluded by saying that while I understood personal opinions were personal, the disconnect between her stated professional values and her private behavior raised questions about the sincerity of the firm's commitment to its own CSR initiatives. I reiterated that I was a proud member of the rural community they claimed to support, and that this incident had left me deeply concerned about the authenticity of their efforts. I didn't demand anything. I didn't threaten. I simply presented the facts clearly and concisely, letting the implications speak for themselves. I pressed send. That was the one phone call, or rather, the one email that changed everything. The ripple effect was almost immediate. Within hours, I received an email back from the head of the CSR department, profusely apologizing and assuring me that they took such matters very seriously. The next day, I got a call from a very apologetic HR representative who was clearly walking on eggshells. They couldn't, of course, disclose specific personnel actions, but the tone of their voices, the deference, the sudden solicitousness, told me everything I needed to know. I heard later through my parents that Clara had been called into multiple meetings, questioned, and was absolutely fuming. She had been publicly reprimanded, removed from her position as a public face for the rural outreach program, and her upcoming speech at the industry conference had been reassigned to a colleague. Her promotion, which she had worked so hard for, was put under review. The embarrassment was immense, precisely what I had intended. She hadn't been fired, but her career trajectory had been severely impacted, and her carefully crafted image had been thoroughly tarnished within her professional circles. She was no longer the golden child, the shining example of corporate success. She was the executive who had publicly embarrassed the firm by contradicting its core values. My parents, when they found out, were initially shocked and upset. They tried to mediate to get me to apologize to Clara, but I stood my ground. I explained to them, calmly and rationally, that Clara's actions were not just a personal slight, but a direct attack on my family and our chosen way of life. I explained that I had endured her snobbery for years, and that this final insult aimed at my children was unforgivable. I told them that sometimes family members need to be held accountable, even if it's painful. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to understand. They saw the validity in my perspective, recognized the pattern of Clara's behavior, and eventually they acknowledged that she had indeed crossed a line. Clara, of course, was furious. She didn't call me to apologize. She called to unleash a torrent of vitriol, accusing me of sabotage, of being jealous, of ruining her life. I listened to her rant, and then calmly I said, "Maybe now you'll understand that words have consequences, Clara, and that treating your family with disdain eventually comes back to bite you." I then hung up the phone. Our relationship, already strained, completely broke down. We haven't spoken in years. It's a sad reality to be estranged from your own sister, but sometimes protecting your peace and the well-being of your family is worth the cost. My kids, bless their hearts, were mostly unaware of the full extent of the drama, but they did notice that Aunt Clara didn't come around anymore, and that the holidays at Grandma and Grandpa's house felt much more relaxed and welcoming. They continued to be happy, well-adjusted country kids, and that was all that mattered to me. I continued my life on the farm with Ben and our children. Our life might not have the glitter and glamour of Clara's urban existence, but it is rich in genuine connection, hard work, and love. I learned a profound lesson about standing up for myself and my family, about the power of truth, and about the quiet satisfaction of well-deserved revenge. So that's how I made one phone call, one email, and changed the trajectory of my family dynamics forever. It was a difficult choice, one that cost me a relationship with my sister, but it was a choice I made to protect my children, my husband, and my own dignity. I don't regret it. I finally stood up for myself and for the life I chose against someone who consistently tried to diminish it. Like this video if you were on my side, if you believe in standing up for your family and for what's right. Subscribe for more stories where ordinary people face extraordinary challenges and find their inner strength. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Was my revenge justified? What would you have done differently? I'm eager to hear your honest opinions. I'll see you all in the next story.